Okay, all right. So our presentation today is on diabetic retinopathy and how we can prevent it. Next slide, please.
Hola, buenas tardes y bienvenidos. Nosotros somos el primer grupo del Valle de Coachella de FPL 2021 y nuestro tema es la retinopatía diabética y cómo podemos prevenirlo. Siguiente, por favor.
Meet the team. Hi, I'm Alexa, and I'm an incoming transfer student at UCR.
Hello, my name is Ashley Wilkins, and I'm going to be a senior in high school at Xavier College Preparatory.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cindy Nguyen, and I'm a fourth year at UCR.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danica Vindriza, and I just graduated from Pomona College.
Hello, everyone. I am Dulce Ortiz, and I am a first-year college student at COD.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saito Ortiz, and I'm a second-year college student at Barstow Community College.
Hi, everybody. I'm William Wong, and I'm a third year at UCR. Next slide, please.
¿Conoce al grupo? Yo soy Alexa y estos son mis compañeros Ashley, Cindy, Danica, Dulce, Syra y William. Next.
Okay, so who are we? We're a part of the Future Physician Leaders Program, which is actually a pipeline program for the UCR School of Medicine. The program is a 9-week summer program which aims to educate the community about a certain healthcare topic and brings awareness to the community about said topic. Next slide, please.
¿Quiénes somos? Formamos parte del programa de Futuros Líderes Médicos, un programa de la Facultad de Medicina de la Universidad de Riverside. El programa es un programa de verano de 9 semanas que tiene como objetivo educar a la comunidad sobre un determinado tema de la salud y llevar a la conciencia de la comunidad sobre dicho tema. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's talk about our mission, our purpose. So our group's mission this summer is to educate and spread awareness within the Inland Empire and Coachella Valley regarding diabetic retinopathy, specifically what it is, symptoms associated with it, how to prevent it with a healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet, and if you are affected, how you can improve your health. Next slide, please.
Nuestra misión como equipo es educar y difundir el conocimiento de la área de Inland Empire y el Valle de Coachella sobre la retinopatía diabética, qué es, cuáles son los síntomas, cómo prevenirlo y si se ve afectado, cómo puede mejorar su salud. Next slide.
Disclaimer note. Just to clarify, we are not highly trained medical professionals. Therefore, the information presented is not meant to substitute any medical professional help or diagnosis pertaining to you or anyone else. Next slide, please. Nota de advertencia. Solo para aclarar, nosotros no somos médicos profesionales, por lo tanto, la información presentada no es diseñada a sustituir ningún diagnóstico o ayuda médica relacionada con usted o cualquier otra persona. Siguiente, por favor.
Hello, everyone. We ask that you please take this voluntary pre-survey to help our group gather data on how effective this presentation is. This survey tries to ensure confidentiality, and all personal data will be deleted as of August 13th, 2021, which will be the finale of this program. We hope that you take the survey to allow our group to use statistical data to prove growth and how effective this presentation is. Please scan the QR code or copy the link in the chat to begin the survey. You will now have 5 minutes to complete it.
Les queremos pedir que por favor tomen esta encuesta. Toda la información que nos dará va a ser completamente confidencial y es completamente voluntario que lo tome. Si con la información que agarremos con esta encuesta nos va a ayudar a ver qué tan efectivo es nuestra presentación y también les queremos dejar saber que toda la información será borrada el 13 de agosto. Les daremos 5 minutos para tomar la encuesta.
Does anyone need extra time? Feel free to put it in the chat if you do.
Si alguien ocupa más tiempo para llenar esta encuesta, déjalo saber en el chat.
Okay, if no one says anything, we're going to be moving on. Thank you. So let's start. What is diabetic retinopathy? Para comenzar, ¿qué es la retinopatía diabética? Okay, so diabetic retinopathy is a diabetes complication that affects the back of the eyes, especially in the area where there are light-sensitive tissues. In this area, the blood vessels are swelled and begin to leak. Diabetic retinopathy is the most common and leading cause for blindness in America. The reason why the swelling of blood vessel leads to vision loss is because with the changes in the anatomy of the blood vessels, insufficient oxygen is delivered to these light-sensitive tissues, and that is responsible for vision in our eyes. So depicted below are two images. On the left is a healthy eye, and on the right is an eye diagnosed with diabetic retinopathy. So in the image on the right, you can see in the zoom-in portion that the blood vessels are swelled and look almost like beans, and this is what usually happens in diabetic retinopathy. And like previous mentioned, the swelling causes leaking to occur, and this in total causes blindness.
La retinopatía diabética es una complicación en el ojo que afecta y daña los vasos sanguíneos del tejido sensible a la luz en la parte posterior de atrás de los ojos, y es la causa más común y principal de ceguera en los Estados Unidos. Como puede ver, al lado izquierdo hay un ojo saludable a comparación al lado derecho, donde hay un ojo que tiene retinopatía diabética. Y si puede ver, los vasos sanguíneos están hinchados, y eso quiere decir que no hay suficiente oxígeno que llega al tejido que ocupamos para ver. Siguiente.
So there are two types of diabetic retinopathy. The first type is non-proliferative, and the second type is proliferative. So what is the difference? So the non-proliferative is the early stages of diabetic retinopathy and the less severe kind of diabetic retinopathy. So in the non-proliferative, tiny blood vessels leak blood or fluid, causing them to form deposits in the eye. While on the other hand, proliferative, abnormal blood vessel begins to grow, which causes scarring and retina detachment. So depicted below are two images. As you can see, the one beneath proliferative is a lot more red, showing more severe irritation and scarring of the eye. Okay, next slide.
Hay dos tipos de retinopatía diabética. La primera es la no proliferativa, que es la menos severa y la más común. Y esta es cuando los vasos sanguíneos derraman líquido o sangre en la retina. Y la segunda es la proliferativa, que cuando los vasos sanguíneos abnormales comienzan a crecer, por lo cual puede ocasionar desprendimiento de la retina. Como puede ver en las dos fotos, en la no proliferativa está más clara que la proliferativa y eso quiere decir que la retina está irritada. Next.
Okay, so what are the symptoms associated with diabetic retinopathy? So the four main symptoms are blurry vision, floaters, blind spots, and the ultimate and very end symptom is full vision loss. So blurry vision and floaters are usually occurring during the non-proliferative stage, as mentioned before, is the less severe stages, while blind spots and vision loss is symptoms associated with proliferative, which is the more damaging stages of diabetic retinopathy. So we want to emphasize that if you ever witness any of these in your line of vision, it is very important to contact your physician and do an eye exam. Diabetic retinopathy is very occurring in our community and is very important to start prevention early with early indication. Next slide.
Los síntomas asociados con esta enfermedad son la visión borrosa, los puntos ciegos, manchas oscuras que flotan y la última y peor etapa es la pérdida de la visión. La visión borrosa y los puntos ciegos están asociados con la no proliferativa, mientras las manchas oscuras que flotan y la pérdida de visión están asociadas con la proliferativa. Y también les queremos dejar saber que cuando empiece a sentir algunos de estos síntomas que consulte con su doctor. Next slide.
Hope you guys are ready for a pop quiz. Esperamos que estés listo para una encuesta sorpresa. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the last and worst stage of diabetic retinopathy? So the choices you have are A, see new colors, B, total blindness, or C, your eyeball falls out of the socket. Okay, so ¿cuál es la última y peor etapa de retinopatía diabética? A, ver nuevos colores, B, perder la vista total, o C, se te cae un ojo. Okay, we'll give you time to answer that in the chat. Okay, and I've seen a lot of B's in the chat, and that was correct. Y la respuesta correcta es B, perder la vista total. Next slide, please.
All right, so to recap, we just went over what diabetic retinopathy is and the symptoms associated with it, and worst case scenario, what happens if it reaches the last stage. So now we're going to be talking about who is affected and who is at risk. So as stated before, diabetic retinopathy is a diabetes complication. So this means that as soon as somebody is diagnosed with diabetes, they automatically have a chance of getting diabetic retinopathy sometime throughout their lives. However, this doesn't mean that they will automatically get diabetic retinopathy. Through prevention tips that we're going to be sharing in a few slides, we'll find out that it is preventable and something that we can avoid. But before that, we're going to get into what makes someone even more likely to get diagnosed, and we'll be taking a look at some statistics.
¿Quién se ve afectado? Como hemos estado diciendo, la retinopatía diabética es una complicación a causa del diabetes. Esto quiere decir que cuando alguien es diagnosticado con diabetes, tiene la probabilidad de contraer esta enfermedad, pero no quiere decir que automáticamente lo tenga. Esto sí es prevenible y antes de que empecemos a ver quién es afectado, vamos a ver unas estadísticas. Next slide, please.
So this statistic right here is from 2004, which we know is fairly outdated. And unfortunately, there isn't as much data about diabetic retinopathy and the population it affects as much as we would like to see, but that's another matter for another conversation. So again, as of 2004, 1 out of 29 people ages 40 and over have been diagnosed with diabetic retinopathy. Next slide, please.
Esta estadística es del 2004 y desafortunadamente no hay mucha información sobre esta enfermedad, pero por lo que podemos ver, 1 de cada 29 personas de 40 años o más tiene retinopatía diabética. Next slide, please.
So here we have a more recent statistic where, according to the National Eye Institute and the National Institutes of Health, as of 2010, 7.6 million people in the United States had diabetic retinopathy. And if you look at the graph on the right, you'll see that that number is only set to increase. So paying attention to the orange bars in this graph, we'll see that by 2050, the population in the United States that's expected to have diabetic retinopathy doubles to 14 million people. This is really alarming, especially because diabetic retinopathy is something that we can prevent, which again, we'll be talking about in next slides. Next slide, please.
De acuerdo al Instituto Nacional del Ojo y Instituto Nacional de la Salud, en el 2010, 7.6 millones de personas fueron diagnosticadas con retinopatía diabética. Y si se enfoca en la foto que tenemos aquí, en la barra anaranjada, en el 2050 parece que va a duplicar a casi 14 millones de personas con retinopatía diabética. Y eso no es bueno porque esta enfermedad puede ser prevenible. Siguiente, por favor.
So as we've been mentioning, just because a person has diabetes, it doesn't automatically mean that they'll be getting diabetic retinopathy. This is why it's really important to be aware of the different risk factors that will make someone even more likely to get diagnosed with diabetic retinopathy, because education is the first step towards prevention. So if you look at this slide here, you'll notice that a lot of the risk factors have to do with how well somebody is managing their diabetes. It's really important to make sure that your blood sugars remain at stable and low levels, and that you watch out for things such as high blood pressure and high cholesterol, and that you control your smoking. If any of these get too out of hand, the chances that you will get diabetic retinopathy will greatly increase. How long you've had diabetes also plays a role. So the longer you've had it, the more likely you are to get diabetic retinopathy. And finally, if you are pregnant and become diabetic, or already have diabetes and get pregnant, the chances of getting diabetic retinopathy increase greatly. Next slide, please.
Entonces, esos son unos de los factores más importantes que potencialmente pueden conducir un diagnóstico para la retinopatía diabética. Al mirar de cerca, vemos que la mayoría de los riesgos están relacionados con el descontrol del diabetes. Por ejemplo, tener niveles altos de azúcar en la sangre o en el colesterol y en la presión arterial continuamente hará que sea mucho más propenso a tener la retinopatía diabética. Y la duración de diabetes también es importante porque cuanto más tiempo haya tenido diabetes, más probabilidades tendrá de que le diagnostiquen la retinopatía diabética. Y finalmente, si es diabética y se embaraza o desarrolla diabetes durante su embarazo, corre el riesgo de contraer la retinopatía diabética. Siguiente, por favor.
Okay, so now let's talk about some stats in the Riverside County. So as we can see, 10.1% of California residents had diabetes, while 10.9% of Riverside County residents have diabetes. We can see there's a clear health disparity here due to some barriers, which I'll talk about. One of these barriers would be the education barrier. 43.6% of adults with diabetes have never taken a course or class on how to manage their diabetes on their own. Next slide, please.
Entonces, el diabetes y la salud ocular en el condado de Riverside a partir del 2019 nos dice que 10.1% de los residentes de California tienen diabetes, comparable con el 10.9% de los residentes en el condado de Riverside. Como podemos ver, hay un hay una diferencia en el condado de Riverside y los promedios de California. Además, vemos que 43.6% de los adultos con diabetes nunca han tomado un curso para manejar su diabetes y eso contribuye al aumento de casos. Siguiente, por favor.
Okay, so now let's talk about some stats in the San Bernardino County. As we can see, 10.8% of adults in the San Bernardino County have been diagnosed with diabetes. This is also an increase from the California average of 10.1%. As we can also see in the San Bernardino County, about 32 out of every 100,000 people have died from diabetes complications, which is actually 50% higher than the state average. This is a very big health disparity, which I'll get to in the slide after the next one about some of the barriers in our areas that prevent people from getting treatment. Next slide, please.
Y el diabetes en el condado de San Bernardino a partir del 2018 dice que 10.8% de los adultos han sido diagnosticados con diabetes y 32.4 de cada 100,000 personas han fallecido por complicaciones con sus diabetes. Y eso es 50% más que el promedio del estado. Siguiente, por favor.
Okay. So now let's talk about the barriers that cause the health disparities in our area. The very first barrier would be the lack of education. Like I said earlier, 43.6% of adults have never taken a class on how to manage their diabetes. As a result, they're unable to deal with their diabetes and eventually will develop diabetic retinopathy. Another barrier is the lack of insurance or finances. The lack of insurance makes hospital visits incredibly expensive. And as a result, if they never go see their primary care provider or the ER or any healthcare professional, they will not know that they have diabetes. As a result, they're unable to control it and eventually do develop diabetic retinopathy. And finally, the lack of support systems in our area. There simply aren't enough food drives and food pantries where people can get free, fresh, healthy groceries and instead have to turn to the cheaper frozen food or fast food alternatives. Next slide, please.
Las barreras que previenen acceso al cuidado. La primera es la falta de educación. Como hemos visto, 43.6 personas nunca han tomado una clase de cómo controlar su diabetes o mantenerla bajo control. La segunda sería la falta de aseguranza y financiamiento. Y por fin, falta de sistema de apoyo. Next slide, please.
So now we are going to discuss how to actually prevent diabetic retinopathy. Así que ahora vamos a discutir cómo prevenir la retinopatía diabética. Siguiente, por favor. In regards to prevention, something you can do is adopt a healthy lifestyle, which would mean that you're going to make healthy diet choices that are balanced, consistent, and you're going to try to avoid bad eating habits. It's okay if you have a cookie once in a while, just as long as it's not constant, and you should also exercise. The max is 30 minutes, but you could adjust this to your schedule. And while exercising, you should also stay hydrated. And some major habits you should definitely avoid are smoking, drug abuse, and alcohol abuse. Next slide, please.
Adoptando una vida saludable también les puede ayudar a prevenir esta enfermedad. Por ejemplo, tomar decisiones saludables como balancear sus comidas, ser consistente y evitar malos hábitos de alimentación. Está bien si se come una galleta de vez en cuando, con que no sea diario. También es importante que haga ejercicio por lo menos 30 minutos al día y que se mantenga hidratado mientras lo hace. Y finalmente, prevenir los hábitos malos como fumar, el abuso de drogas y el abuso de alcohol. Next slide, please.
Some more prevention tips include regular screenings, which will definitely help in detecting the damage to the eyes. As we mentioned previously, you should also try to keep your blood sugars, blood pressure, and cholesterol levels at a normal state. Next slide, please.
Más consejos para prevenir esto es que se haga un examen de los ojos anual. La detección temprana ayuda a prevenir el daño al ojo Y también es importante que mantenga los niveles bajo control, como sus niveles de azúcar, los niveles de la presión y el colesterol. Next slide, please.
Hope you guys are excited for another pop quiz. Yay. Okay, so espero que están emocionados para otro encuesta sorpresa. Next slide, please. So which one of these is a healthy food option? A, cheeseburger with large fries. B, family size bag of chips. C, pesto chicken with rice and broccoli. And then, ¿cuál de las siguientes es una opción de comida saludable? A, una hamburguesa con papas grandes. B, una bolsa grande de sabritas. O C, pollo con arroz y brócoli. And yes, the correct answer was C, pesto chicken with rice and broccoli, although the other two options sound pretty good. Y la respuesta correcta es C, pollo con arroz y brócoli. Next slide, please.
So here we have some affordable resources that we found throughout our research that can help, that have free or low cost diabetes management programs and just, a place for you to get health resources for diabetic retinopathy and diabetes. So in order, we have the Riverside Chronic Disease Collaborative. We have the Eisenhower Health Diabetes Program, and that resource is based in the Coachella Valley. And finally, we have the Riverside Free Clinic Diabetes Management Program. So like we mentioned, just mentioned, all of these resources are low cost or free, pay what you can and sort of on a sliding scale. And they provide things such as classes, or, you can talk to nutritionists and dietitians to help you come up with a dieting plan if you're a diabetic, if that's what you're looking for. So next slide, please.
Aquí están unos recursos económicos que les puede ayudar a controlar su diabetes. Por ejemplo, el Riverside Chronic Disease Collaborative, Eisenhower Health Diabetes Program y Riverside Free Clinic Diabetes Management Program. Y también queremos dejarles saber que la tercera opción está abierta a los inmigrantes indocumentados y les ayuda con otros servicios aparte de cómo manejar su diabetes. Next slide, please.
So if there's one last thing that we want everyone here today to take away from our presentation, it's these keywords. It's that prevention is key. So like we've been mentioning throughout our presentation, somebody with diabetes is automatically at risk of getting diabetic retinopathy, but that doesn't mean that they're automatically going to get it down the line. So this is where prevention comes in, and prevention starts with educating yourself about this disease with diabetic retinopathy, which you've already started to do by watching this presentation. By implementing the habits that we mentioned previously, avoiding the risk factors and maintaining blood sugar levels, you will be less likely to get diabetic retinopathy. And this is where we also want to point out that diabetic retinopathy also isn't the only diabetes complication out there. There are so many others that we can't even begin to touch on in this presentation, but everything is all connected. If you maintain your blood sugar levels, then you will be less likely to get other complications, including diabetic retinopathy. So prevention is key.
La prevención es clave. Como hemos estado mencionando durante esta presentación, alguien con diabetes está a riesgo a desarrollar la retinopatía diabética, pero no quiere decir que automáticamente lo tengan. La prevención es muy importante, y si hay una cosa que queremos que se les quede después de esta presentación, es que la prevención es clave. La prevención empieza cuando uno aprende sobre la enfermedad, que es lo que usted está haciendo aquí ahorita con nosotros, y implementando los hábitos que hemos mencionado, evitar los factores de riesgo y mantener sus niveles de azúcar bajo control, es cuando será menos probable que desarrolle la retinopatía diabética. Así que acuérdese que la prevención es clave. Next slide, please.
It is now post-survey time. So thank you so much everyone for joining us and tuning into this presentation. So please use the same identifiers that you used in the pre-survey so that we can track progress, and we hope that you learned something from the slideshow today. As stated earlier, the survey is completely voluntary, but this data is crucial for our project, so please, please, please take the post-survey. You will now have 5 minutes to complete it, and the link can be found down below in the chat.
Ya casi llegamos al final de nuestra presentación y queremos pedirles que por favor tomen nuestra encuesta posterior usando el mismo nombre que usó cuando hizo la primera encuesta, y acuérdense que toda la información es voluntaria y confidencial y será borrada el 13 de agosto. Y tomando esta encuesta nos dejará saber qué tan efectivo ha sido esta presentación. Les daremos 5 minutos. Does anybody need more time filling out the survey? Si hay alguien que ocupe más tiempo para hacer la encuesta, nos puede dejar saber en el chat. Si no, vamos a continuar.
Okay, I don't see anything in the chat, so we will be moving on.
All right, so here is our brochure, and this is basically a clear overview on what we covered about diabetic retinopathy. Please feel free to share with your friends and family to keep them informed. And here we have the QR code. Next slide. Y bien, así que aquí tenemos nuestro folleto y esto es básicamente una descripción clara de lo que cubrimos de la retinopatía diabética. No dude en compartirlo con sus amigos y familias para mantenerlos informados. Así que aquí tenemos el QR código. Siguiente, por favor.
And stay connected with us. We have a website, Instagram, and an email. We've attached the QR codes, and we'll also be having the links in the chat. Next slide, please. Mantente conectados con nosotros. Tenemos una página web, Instagram y un correo electrónico. También ahí están los códigos QR y los links en la chat. Next slide, please.
We also have a podcast that we put up on our website that we would love if everybody would had the time to check out. Through each of it, we talk about our experiences with our community health project and also talk about our experiences with the Future Physician Leaders Program in general. So yeah, episodes are out now and they'll be continued to be released throughout till the end of this week. Next slide, please.
También hemos lanzado un podcast donde hablamos de nuestra experiencia en este programa y nuestra experiencia haciendo esta presentación. Ya hay unos episodios disponibles y vamos a sacar más durante la semana. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much for attending. Gracias por atender. Any question, comments, or suggestions? And algunas preguntas, comentarios, sugerencias. So feel free to add them in the chat. And if there's no question, you guys are free to leave. And yeah, thank you so much for coming today. We totally appreciate it.